He is the genial uncle of American letters, white suit, cigar, easy laugh. That portrait is accurate, and it hides almost everything that mattered to him. The same man concluded that human beings possess no freedom of will at all. He argued that no human being has ever performed a single unselfish act. He decided that the faculty we call conscience is a kind of disease. He came to believe that man is the lowest animal, not the highest. And at the very end of his life he concluded that nothing exists at all. These were not throwaway jokes scribbled by a tired and bitter old man. He worked these positions out over decades in essays, novels, and private notebooks. He built arguments for them, with premises, examples, and conclusions he could defend. Then he hid the darkest of them, afraid of what readers would think. Some appeared in print only after he was safely dead and beyond reply. This series reconstructs that buried philosophy as one single connected line of argument. The aim is not to admire the man, but to test whether he was right. Every later conclusion rests on a single foundation that he laid down first. It concerns the thing you feel most sure of, your own freedom to choose. Twain thought that freedom was an illusion, and he thought he could prove it. If he is right, almost everything you believe about yourself has to change. Part 1. The choice that was already made. You wake in the morning and you decide that it is time to get up. Nobody forced you. No chain held you down, and the choice felt entirely your own. You could easily have stayed under the warm blankets, and yet you chose otherwise. This sense of an open future sits at the centre of how we live. We praise people for their good choices and blame them for the bad ones. Courts, friendships, and self-respect all assume the chooser could have done otherwise. Twain looked hard at that feeling of freedom and asked one simple question. Where did the decision to rise truly come from, traced step by step? You got up because you wanted coffee, or feared being late for work, but you did not choose to want coffee, or to fear that lateness. Those desires arrived on their own, handed to you by body and history. You acted on the strongest desire present, and you did not author it. Push the question one step back, and the same answer returns every single time. Each desire has a cause, and that cause has a cause before it. Your temperament came from genes you never picked and parents you never chose. Your beliefs came from a language and a hometown that simply surrounded you at birth. At no point did a free and uncaused self step in to make the decision. This is the heart of the position philosophers call hard determinism. Hard determinism says every event is fixed by the causes that came before. On that view, your choices are events too, and they are fixed as well. Twain set this whole argument inside a small book that he called What is Man? He wrote it as a debate between an old man and a young one. The old man states the thesis flatly that a human being is a machine, not a loose metaphor, not a figure of speech, but a literal machine of flesh. A machine takes in outside forces and gives back the only output it can. The young man objects to this, much the way you might want to object now. Surely, he says, a person can originate a fresh thought from somewhere inside himself. The old man denies it, and that denial is the core of the book. His reasoning runs as a chain that you can lay out quite plainly. First premise: every mental event is produced by some cause that came before it. Second premise: the mind never manufactures a single thought out of nothing whatsoever. It can only assemble the material that prior experience has already poured into it. Third, what feels like a free decision is really the strongest motive winning out, and you do not select your motives, you only discover which one is strongest. If those three claims are all true, the conclusion follows without any escape. You are moved, you are not the mover, and authorship is only a feeling. Consider a woman who is offered a new job in a distant, unfamiliar city. She sits at her kitchen table and weighs the difficult move for several hours. On one side, she feels ambition, a strong pull towards something larger than now. On the other, she feels fear and love for the home she already has. She did not install that ambition, and she did not install that fear. They came from a temperament and a past that simply produced them in her. When she finally decides, the stronger set of feelings has carried the day. She calls that result her choice, and the name is the only freedom there. You might reply that the long weighing was itself the free act in question, but the weighing followed its own causes, exactly like everything that came before it. How long she paused, which fears spoke loudest, all of that was already set. Determinism does not deny that we think, it denies that the thinking is uncaused. The deliberation is a real link in the chain, not a break in it. 2 centuries before Twain, the philosopher Spinoza gave a sharp image for this. Suppose a stone is thrown through the air, and suppose the stone could think. Feeling itself sail upward, it would conclude that it had chosen to fly. It feels the motion from inside, but never sees the hand that threw it. Twain says we are that stone, certain of a freedom we cannot locate. This is not a quarrel that ended with Twain, or even with Spinoza. In the 1980s, a scientist named Benjamin Libet ran a famous test. He watched the brain while people made simple free decisions to move a hand. A burst of brain activity appeared before the person felt any conscious decision. The brain seemed to move first, and the feeling of choosing came after. Libet's experiment is still argued over, and its meaning is far from settled. But the picture it suggested is exactly the one Twain had already drawn. The neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky restated this hard view in a recent forceful book. He argues that no neuron in your head ever escapes its prior causes. Yet many serious philosophers think this whole argument quietly misses the real target. They are called compatibilists, and their reply deserves to be heard at full strength. They say the freedom worth wanting was never freedom from cause and effect. A freedom that floated free of all causes would be mere randomness, not control. The freedom that matters is acting from your own reasons, without a gun to your head. That kind of freedom, they argue, survives determinism completely intact. Twain has a reply, and the standoff between them is honestly unresolved. Your reasons, he would say, were themselves handed to you by causes you never chose. Calling them yours renames the problem, it does not solve it. the compatibilist redefines freedom, while Twain keeps asking who authored the self. Both moves are defensible, and the debate is still alive in philosophy today. So Twain leaves you a strange and heavy picture of yourself. You are a machine that runs on motives it did not write. If that is so, one question presses harder than all the rest. What is the single fuel that every one of those motives burns? Twain thought he had found it, and the answer cuts deeper than lost free will. Part 2. What you are really after. You know people who give without being asked and expect nothing back. A stranger jumps into a river to save a child he will never meet. A soldier throws his body onto a grenade to shield the men beside him. A nurse sits through the night with a dying patient who cannot even speak. These look like the purest cases of acting for someone other than yourself. Common sense says some acts are selfish and others are plainly the opposite. Twain denied the distinction, and he denied it without a single exception. No human being, he argued, has ever once acted for another in the end. Every act, however noble it looks, is done to content the doer's own spirit. The old man in his book states it as a law, not a mood. A person acts first, last, and always to secure his own inward approval. The outward good done to others is real, but it is never the true aim. The argument is short, and you can set it out in 2 steps. First, every voluntary act is done to reach some satisfaction the agent seeks. Second, that satisfaction is always the agent's own, felt inside the agent alone. Therefore, the final target of every act is one's own state of mind. The conclusion is that all motives, scratched deep enough, turn out to be self-serving. This position has a name in philosophy, called psychological egoism. Psychological egoism is the claim that self-interest secretly drives every human action. Take the hardest case, the soldier and the grenade, and follow Twain's reasoning. The man sees the grenade land among his friends and has one instant to act. Twain asks what was unbearable to him in that single crowded instant. It was the picture of his friends torn apart while he stood and watched. It was the future shame of being the man who saved himself and survived. He could not endure that inner state, so he acted to escape it. On Twain's reading, even this is a purchase, paid in his own life. He bought relief from an intolerable self at the highest possible price. The same lens fits the gentler cases just as snugly. You give your last few coins to a beggar shivering on the corner. Twain says you did it to stop the ache of your own pity. The coins brought you comfort, and the beggar's comfort was a side effect. Keep the change and walk on, and the ache would have followed you home. You paid to silence it, which means the buyer and the seller were you. There is something bracing and honest in this, and that is its real power. It strips the self-flattery out of our finest moments and dares us to look. But the argument has a famous weakness, and we should give it full force. It was named long before Twain by an English bishop called Joseph Butler. Butler aimed his objection straight at the move Twain's old man makes. Here is Butler's point, and it is sharper than it first appears. You feel satisfaction when your friend is saved. That part is true enough. But where does that satisfaction come from? What produces the warm relief? It comes from getting a thing you already wanted, namely your friend's safety. If you had not cared about your friend, his rescue would not satisfy you. So the wanting comes first, and the wanting points outward at the friend. The self-satisfaction is the byproduct of a desire aimed beyond the self. That means selfish pleasure presupposes unselfish desire, rather than replacing it. Notice how completely this reverses the egoist's claim. Twain says we help others only because helping pleases us inside. Butler answers that helping pleases us only because we first wanted to help. The pleasure is evidence of the unselfish desire, not a substitute for it. Twain has the order of events exactly backward on Butler's analysis. A second objection follows close behind, and it is just as damaging. Suppose every act, no matter what, gets relabeled as the pursuit of self-approval. Then the theory can never be wrong, because nothing could ever count against it. A claim that forbids no possible behaviour also explains no actual behaviour. The 20th century philosopher Joel Feinberg pressed this hard against egoism. If the word selfish swells to cover all conduct, it stops meaning anything. The challenge is not only logical, it has been tested in the laboratory. A psychologist named Daniel Batson spent decades trying to catch hidden selfishness. He designed experiments to see whether people help only to gain a reward. He let some subjects escape a suffering stranger easily, with no one watching. Pure egoism predicts they take the easy exit and avoid the trouble entirely. Yet the subjects who felt the most empathy stayed and helped anyway. They helped when leaving was simple and when no reward could follow. Batson concluded that real other directed motivation exists, and the evidence is strong. So Twain's strict proof fails, struck down by Butler and by the laboratory. And yet something of his point refuses to die so cleanly. We do overrate our own nobility, constantly and almost without noticing. We do reach for the flattering story about why we did the kind thing. Twain failed to prove that all motives are selfish. That much is clear. But he succeeded at something humbler and lasting, a warning against self-deception. He forces you to check your finest motives for a hidden price tag. That warning leads straight into the next problem he set himself. If we are driven to win our own approval, a question opens beneath it. Where does the standard of approval come from in the first place? What decides which acts make you feel clean and which make you feel guilty? Twain had an answer, and it was that the standard was installed from outside. Part 3. The voice you mistook for your own. There is a voice inside that tells you when you have done wrong. It speaks before you reason, and it speaks with an authority you did not grant it. Many traditions call it the voice of God, or the voice of reason itself. We treat it as a compass, a needle that points reliably at the good. The common advice repeated everywhere is simply to follow your conscience. That advice assumes the conscience knows something true about right and wrong. Twain noticed a fact about conscience that quietly wrecks this picture. Consciences disagree violently across different times and different places. A man in one century feels deep guilt over a thing another century ignores. Each conscience feels equally inner, equally certain, equally like the voice of truth. A faculty that points in opposite directions cannot be reading the same map. It is reading the local customs and mistaking them for the moral law. Twain's verdict was blunt, and he repeated it in many forms. The conscience is not born in you, it is built in you by training. Your family, your town, and your church pour their verdicts into you young. Those verdicts harden into a voice that then feels like your own nature. He summed up the whole machinery in one of his sharpest lines. Training is everything, he wrote. The peach was once a bitter almond. The cauliflower, he added, is only a cabbage with a college education. What looks like inborn character is mostly cultivation we forget receiving. Take a slaveholder in the American South, a church-going man of his county. He prays sincerely, he loves his children, and he owns other human beings. His conscience on the matter is calm, and it is calm for a reason. His whole world has trained him to see ownership as natural and lawful. Now suppose he considered setting those people free one quiet evening. His conscience would not reward him, it would punish him with guilt. It would accuse him of robbing his family and breaking a sacred order. The compass points him with total confidence toward keeping people in chains. This is the unsettling core of Twain's argument about conscience. The faculty did not malfunction in that man. It worked exactly as trained. It delivered a confident verdict that happened to be monstrous. So conscience is not a window onto moral truth at all. It is a mirror, and it shows you the society that built it. Follow your conscience can therefore be the worst advice in the world. Laid out as steps, the reasoning is hard to dodge. First, conscience hands down verdicts that feel certain and immediate. Second, those verdicts shift in step with upbringing, region, and era. Third, a faculty whose output tracks your training, not the facts, is unreliable about the facts. Therefore, conscience on its own is an untrustworthy guide to what is truly right. This is not an old idea left behind by modern psychology. A researcher named Jonathan Haidt has spent his career studying moral judgment. His finding is that we feel a verdict first, in a fast flash of intuition. Only afterward does reasoning arrive, mostly to justify what we already felt. He calls reason the rider, and intuition the elephant it pretends to steer. And the elephant, he shows, is trained by the culture it grows up in. Different societies raise different intuitions about loyalty, purity, and authority. Twain's trained conscience and Haidt's trained elephant are the same animal. But the argument carries a danger that Twain has to face squarely. If conscience only mirrors training, then no conscience is more correct than another. The abolitionists' outrage would be no truer than the slaveholders' calm. Both would just be echoing the towns that happened to raise them. Yet Twain clearly believed that slavery was a genuine and terrible wrong. He did not think the two consciences were merely different flavours of custom. So either some standard runs deeper than conscience, correcting it from below, or his own moral fury has no ground to stand on. That tension is real, and Twain felt it more than he resolved it. If the trained voice can be wrong, something else must be able to judge it. Some deeper faculty would have to overrule the program and side with the truth. We will watch exactly that collision happen later, in A Boy on a Raft. For now, hold the question open, because Twain pushed it one level further. He set aside whether your conscience was trained well or trained badly. He asked a colder question underneath that one about the faculty itself. Is the very power to tell right from wrong a gift to be proud of? Or is that power the single worst thing that ever happened to our species? His answer turned the oldest compliment we pay ourselves completely upside down. Part 4. Below the Beasts. We tell ourselves a flattering story about where humans stand in nature. We are the rational animal, the moral animal, the summit of a long climb. Religion calls us the creature made in the image of God himself. Science, in its popular form, calls us the proud peak of evolution. Either way, the moral sense is supposed to be the thing that lifts us. Our power to know right from wrong is the badge of our high rank. Twain took that badge and turned it over to read the back. The moral sense is the capacity to tell right from wrong, and to choose. An animal lacks it, and so an animal can never truly do wrong. A wolf kills from hunger, never from malice, cruelty, or spite. Only a creature that knows the good can deliberately turn against it. So the faculty we brag about is the one that makes evil possible. The beasts live below right and wrong, untroubled and unable to fall. We are the only animal equipped to choose the wrong on purpose. He laid this out in an essay he did not dare to publish. It is usually called The Lowest Animal, and it reads like a scientific report. Twain pretends to have run experiments comparing man with the other creatures. He puts 7 young calves into a pen with a hungry anaconda. The snake kills 1 calf, eats it, and leaves the other 6 alone. It takes what it needs to live, and not 1 mouthful more. Then he sets a man beside the snake for comparison. He describes an earl who travels far to hunt buffalo on the plains. The earl shoots 72 of them, eats a part of 1, and rides away. The rest he leaves to rot in the sun, killed purely for the sport. The snake killed from need, and the man killed for amusement. Twain's verdict is that the snake behaved better than the Lord. He stacks the differences higher, and they are uncomfortable to read. Man is the only animal that enslaves his own kind for profit. Man is the only one who tortures and burns others over belief. Man is the only patriot who kills strangers he has no quarrel with. No wolf, no anaconda ever did a single one of these things. The cruelty is ours alone, and so is the high opinion of ourselves. Twain compressed the whole indictment into one devastating sentence. That man knows right from wrong proves his intellect stands above the beasts. That he can choose the wrong proves his morals fall below any of them. The animal that cannot sin is, by that measure, morally his superior. Knowing the good is no virtue, if knowing it changes nothing. He framed this as a grim parody of Darwin's great idea. Darwin had traced the ascent of man up from the lower animals. Twain proposed instead the descent of man down from the higher ones. On his account we did not climb, we slid, growing worse as we went. The title of his other version says it plainly enough, man's place in the animal world, and the place he assigns us is the bottom, not the top. Set out as an argument, the chain is clean and brutal. First, moral worth requires the power to do wrong and to hold back from it. Second, only humans possess that power, the moral sense itself. Third, humans who hold it choose wrong on a scale no animal approaches. Therefore, humans rank in practice as the lowest of the animals, not the highest. The objection to this is decisive, and it deserves its full strength. The moral sense is the precondition of every virtue, not only of every vice. Without the power to do wrong, there is no power to do right either. The anaconda is not good, it is merely blank, beneath the reach of goodness. Mercy, courage and sacrifice all need the same faculty that allows cruelty. So the moral sense does not drop us below the beasts at all. It lifts us into a country, good and evil, that animals never enter. Twain counts only the debits and quietly ignores every credit in the book. A fair ledger would have to list the other side of the account. The same species produced the nurse, the rescuer, and the man who freed slaves. It produced people who died for strangers and asked for nothing in return. Those deeds were possible only because the moral sense was there to be used. Leave them off the page, and the case against humanity is rigged from the start. Twain has a reply, and it keeps the question genuinely open. Grant all the credits, he might say, and the debits still run terribly deep. No other creature organizes mass slaughter in the name of an idea. The capacity for ideological killing on a vast scale does seem distinctly human. And the same moral sense that fuels mercy also dresses atrocity as righteousness. The Crusader and the Inquisitor felt as morally certain as any saint. So the faculty cuts both ways, and that alone should end our self-congratulation. We have now spoken as though one steady self carries all of this. One self that gets trained, one self that chooses, one self that bears the moral sense. But Twain doubted whether there is any single self in there to begin with. He suspected the I you trust is a coalition and partly a fiction. Before we can judge the chooser, we have to ask whether the chooser is one. Part 5. The Stranger in the Mirror. You feel like one person, a single eye behind your eyes. That eye seems to last through the years and to author all your acts. Of everything you know this inner unity most directly. It feels less like a belief and more like the floor you stand on. The self is one, continuous and yours, and surely that much is beyond doubt. Yet your own daily life keeps cracking that smooth picture. You want a thing and refuse it in the same breath, at war with yourself. A scolding voice rises that feels less like you than like a separate judge. At night you live whole vivid lives that the morning self never authorized. These are ordinary experiences, and they fit a unit very badly. They fit better the idea of a crowd wearing a single name. Twain dramatized the divided self in a strange early story. A man sits alone when a loathsome shriveled dwarf shuffles into the room. The creature knows his every secret sin and taunts him with each one. Slowly the man realizes who this gloating intruder really is. The dwarf is his own conscience, somehow split off and made flesh. The story's key move is that conscience appears as another, not as the self. It lives inside him, yet it stands against him like a foreign agent. When the man finally seizes and kills it, he feels nothing but joyful relief. The deeper obsession of his later years was the self that lives in dreams. In several manuscripts, Twain wrote of a dream self with its own full existence. That self travels, loves and suffers in worlds the waking man never visits. Twain could not decide which of the two selves had the better claim to be real. In one dream story, he states the suspicion as plainly as he ever dared. Everything in a dream, he wrote, is more deep and strong and real than waking life. The daytime world, by contrast, he called a pale imitation of the true thing, and the daytime person he called the artificial self, the one we merely perform. His own life was the strangest experiment of all on this point. A man named Samuel Clemens invented a writer he called Mark Twain. The invented one grew famous, then grew larger than the man who made him. Clemens had to feed the persona, dress it, and send it on stage for money. The mask became a second self, with appetites and duties of its own. He lived the very thing his stories suspected, a manufactured self made real. Twain was thinking inside a real scientific moment, not merely brooding alone. In his lifetime, a new psychology was beginning to map the hidden mind. Thinkers were describing a buried layer beneath ordinary awareness before Freud was famous. Famous cases of split or double personality were reported and widely discussed. Twain read this material and felt it confirmed what his fiction already feared. The mind, he suspected, was layered and plural, not a single clean point. A century later, surgery produced the most startling evidence for his hunch. To treat severe seizures, doctors sometimes cut the bridge between the brain's two halves. Studied afterward, those patients can behave like two centers of awareness at once. One hand will button a shirt, while the other hand works to unbutton it. The researcher Michael Gazzaniga found something stranger still in these split brains. The talking half invents reasons for actions the other half secretly caused. It manufactures a smooth story on the spot to keep the sense of one author. That tidy storyteller, he argued, is what we mistake for a single unified self. This lines up almost exactly with Twain's old suspicion. The felt unity of the I may itself be a thing the mind produces. And mental products can deceive, as the sense of free choice already showed us. So the oneness you feel so surely might be a narrative, not a fact. There may be no single chooser back there, only a committee with a spokesman. The objection here is fair, and we should not wave it away. Inner conflict does not prove there is no unified subject underneath. It may show oneself with parts, or oneself that misjudges itself. The split brain cases are rare surgical exceptions, not the normal human state. And something, after all, must be the thing that is divided and feels the split. The unity of the self is still a live, unsettled question in philosophy of mind. We have built the whole apparatus now, piece by careful piece. A machine with no free will, driven to win its own approval. A conscience installed from outside and a moral sense that can damn us. A self that may be divided, with a judge and a heart that disagree. The question is what happens when all of it meets one real and terrible choice. Twain wrote that exact scene, and it sits at the moral centre of his country's literature. Part 6. All right then, I'll go to hell. A poor white boy named Huck has run away down the Mississippi River. On a raft beside him rides Jim, a man fleeing slavery toward freedom. For days they drift together, hidden by night, sharing the small raft. Jim watches over the boy, takes his turn at the oar, and trusts him. He tells Huck that the boy is the best friend he has ever had. Between the two of them, on the water, something like real love grows. Then Huck's conscience wakes up, and it is the conscience we already met. It is the trained Southern conscience, built by a world that owned people. It tells him he is helping to steal a woman's lawful property. It tells him this is a sin, and that the sin will send him to hell. The voice torments him until he can no longer bear the guilt of it. So he writes a letter telling Jim's owner exactly where the man can be found. For a moment the letter works, and Huck feels something new. He says he felt washed clean of sin for the first time in his life. His conscience is finally quiet because he has obeyed it completely. By every rule his society taught him, he has just done the right thing. The compass points to betrayal, and he has agreed to follow the compass. But then the memories come, and they will not leave him alone. He remembers Jim's kindness on the river, night after night. He remembers Jim calling him the only friend he had in the world. He sits there with the letter in his hand and his whole future in the balance. He has to choose between the voice in his head and the man on the raft. He says it out loud, 6 words that decide everything. All right then, I'll go to hell. Then he tears the letter to pieces and chooses Jim over heaven itself. Look closely at the exact shape of what just happened. Huck does the right thing while he sincerely believes it is the wrong thing. His conscience says, betray your friend, and his heart says, protect him. The heart wins, and Huck is certain he has just chosen to be evil. Goodness in this scene looks from the inside exactly like damnation. Morality turns out to mean defying a corrupt conscience, not obeying it. Twain told us himself what the book was secretly about. In his notebook he wrote down the formula in a single line. A sound heart and a deformed conscience come into collision in the story. And in that collision, he wrote, the conscience suffers defeat. The deformed thing is the trained voice, mirroring a society built on slavery. The sound thing is the boy's plain human feeling for the man beside him. This scene quietly settles the questions the earlier parts left hanging. The trained conscience from before is here, and it is shown to be deformed. The moral sense from before is here, cutting toward cruelty because it was trained badly. The divided self from before is here, conscience and heart at open war in one boy. And Twain tells us which part to trust when they collide. Not the rule, not the reasoning, but the sympathy, the bond between two people. A philosopher named Jonathan Bennett built a famous argument on this scene. He set Huck beside two other men to make the lesson sharp. Huck has bad principles from his society and strong human sympathy underneath. When they clash, his sympathy wins, and he acts well while feeling guilty. Against him, Bennett places Heinrich Himmler, an architect of mass murder. Himmler also felt flickers of sympathy, and he deliberately crushed them to obey his principle. Beside both, he sets the preacher Jonathan Edwards, who had the bad principle and no pity at all. Edwards could picture the damned suffering forever and feel no flicker of mercy. Bennett's lesson from this trio is precise and disturbing. Your sympathies act as a check on your principles, a second opinion from the heart. When a principle demands that you crush deep sympathy to do something monstrous, distrust the principle. The feeling that the rule is wrong may be wiser than the rule itself. Huck trusted the feeling and acted rightly against everything he had been taught. Himmler trusted the rule and silenced the feeling, with results we all know. This is not a comfortable lesson safely locked in the past. Every age has had a respectable conscience that was confidently terribly wrong. The slaveholder's calm was the ordinary church-going conscience of his place and time. There is no reason to think our own era is the first to be exempt. Somewhere we are likely feeling righteous about something a later age will judge harshly. Twain leaves you the test, not the answer, when principle and sympathy collide. The novel itself, though, has a wound that we should not hide. After the moral height of the raft, the last chapters take a sharp fall. Tom Sawyer arrives and turns Jim's escape into a long, cruel, boyish game. Jim has secretly been freed already by his owner's will, and is in no danger. Yet he is locked up and humiliated for the sake of Tom's adventure. The critic Leo Marx argued that this ending betrays Jim and cheapens the book. It trades the dignity Jim won on the river for farce and embarrassment. That charge has never been fully answered, and the debate continues today. There is the further matter of the book's language and its use in classrooms. A racial slur runs through the pages constantly, and it lands hard on readers. Jim is at times written close to a stage caricature of the era. Some teachers and parents argue the harm outweighs the lesson for young students. Others defend the bleak ending as deliberate, not careless on Twain's part. They read it as a hard truth, that one boy's awakening cannot reform the machine. Society simply reabsorbs Jim as a plaything, exactly as it always did. The dispute is real and unresolved, and an honest account has to leave it standing. Huck saw Jim as a person and broke the law that called him property. But that only raises the colder question lying underneath the whole story. How does an entire society convince itself that some people simply are property? How does it teach itself that one kind of human is a lower kind? Twain answered that in a stranger and harder book than this one. Two babies are switched in a single cradle, and the lie holds for a lifetime. Part 7. The fiction written on the skin. Two babies lie in a great house on the Mississippi, born in the same week. One is the master's son, and heir, the other the son of a slave. The slave child's mother is a woman named Roxy, who serves in that house. She is 1/16 black, and to the eye she looks entirely white. Her son is 1/32 black, and he too looks completely white. Yet by the law of that place, both mother and child are simply black. Roxy is told her baby may one day be sold down the river. That phrase meant being sent to the deep south, to die under the worst labour. To save him, she does a desperate thing one afternoon in the nursery. She dresses her own child in the heir's fine clothes and lays him in the heir's cradle. She dresses the master's child in the coarse cloth of a slave. Then she steps back, and the two infants have traded their entire futures. No one notices, and that single fact is the engine of the whole book. The babies are indistinguishable, so the clothes alone decide who is who. The slave's son is now raised as the white master, named Tom. The master's son is now raised as the slave, named Chambers. From that day, the town treats each boy exactly as his clothing announced. The lie in the cradle becomes the truth that everyone around them believes. Watch what the two boys become as the years pass. Tom, the slave's son, raised as a master, grows cruel, idle and cowardly. He gambles, he lies, and in the end he murders and sells his own mother's people. Chambers, the master's son, raised as a slave, grows humble, fearful, and beaten down. Each boy fits his role so perfectly that the role seems written in his blood. But we know the secret, that the roles were assigned by a switch of cloth. Here is the radical claim the story forces into the open. Race in that world is not a fact about the body at all. It is a costume the society agrees to treat as a destiny. The thing that ruined one boy and crushed the other was never their nature. It was a label painted onto them by other people's belief. The fiction was written on the skin, and the skin had nothing to do with it. The legal absurdity sits at the very heart of this. A man who is 1/32 black is counted wholly black under the rule. Historians call this the one-drop rule, and it governed real American law. A single distant ancestor could place a person on the enslaved side of the line. Twain shows that such a line cannot be seen, touched, or measured. It exists only because a community decided to enforce it as if it were real. This is what scholars now mean by calling race a social construction. A social construction is a category that feels natural, but is really made by people. Money works that way, and so do borders, and so does rank. The pieces of paper and the lines on maps have power only because we honour them. Twain saw decades early that race belongs on that list. The category does real and brutal work, while resting on nothing in nature. But the book contains a deep ambiguity, and we must not paper over it. Tom turns out wicked, and a careless reader could draw a vile lesson from that. He could say the slave's blood revealed itself in the end, after all. Twain seems aware of this trap, and he leaves the ending pointedly unresolved. We are never told for certain whether nature or nurture made Tom what he is. The novel raises the question with great force, and then refuses to answer it. The critic responses to this split sharply, and the disagreement is real. Some read the open ending as Twain's honesty, a refusal to pretend the science was settled. He shows the categories are fake, yet declines to claim he knows what makes character. Others read it as a failure of nerve, a book that loses its own argument at the close. Having proved race is a costume, it lets a hint of blood determinism creep back in. Both readings have strong support, and the matter is genuinely unsettled. The ending sharpens the irony to a cruel edge. The fraud is at last uncovered by fingerprints, and the two men are switched back. The true heir is restored to his fortune, and the impostor is sold away. But the restored heir cannot live as a white gentleman now. He was raised a slave, and that training shaped his every gesture and fear. He is free and rich, and he is lost at home in neither world. The label was corrected, and the lifetime of training underneath it could not be. Twain's point is that the costume, once worn long enough, sinks into the bone. So the earlier idea returns with full and terrible weight. Training is everything. The peach was once a bitter almond, as he had written. Here we watch that maxim ruin two real lives from the cradle forward. What you are is mostly what circumstance made you, before you could consent. And society guards its invented categories as if they were laws of nature. This insight is not buried in the past. It runs through current science. The Human Genome Project and the studies that followed found something striking. There is more genetic variation inside any so-called race than between the races. Two people of the same skin color can differ more in their genes than two of different colors. Biologists increasingly say race is not a clean biological category at all. It is a social and historical one, with real effects but shaky natural footing. Twain reached that conclusion through a switched cradle, a full century before the data. We have seen a single person's worth decided by a costume. Now widen the lens from one cradle to a whole town's self-image. A community can believe itself good, honest, and above temptation. Twain wondered what such a reputation is actually worth. He suspected it was worth nothing, because it had never once been tested. Part 8. The Town That Could Not Be Bought. There is a town named Hadleyburg, and it is famous for one thing. It is known far and wide as the most honest town in the region. The people are proud of this, and they guard the reputation carefully. They raise their children to be incorruptible, and they look down on looser places. The whole town's identity rests on a single shining word, honest. They believe their virtue is solid, settled, and beyond any doubt. A passing stranger is once treated badly by this smug town. He leaves with a grudge, and he spends a long time plotting a revenge. His plan is not violence, and it costs the town no money at first. He simply decides to test the honesty that Hadleyburg is so proud of. He will not attack the reputation directly, he will let the town destroy it. His whole revenge is to give the people a real chance to be dishonest. He delivers a sack he says is full of gold coins. With it comes a story that the gold belongs to whoever once helped him. The rightful claimant, he says, can be known by a certain secret remark. Whoever spoke that remark to him long ago is owed the entire fortune. No one in town can remember saying any such thing. But the sack sits there, glittering in the mind, waiting for a claimant. Then the stranger sends a secret letter to each leading citizen. Each letter privately reveals what the magic remark supposedly was. Each man now believes that he alone knows the phrase that unlocks the gold. Each believes he can claim the fortune and that no one will ever know. One by one, in private, these pillars of honesty decide to lie. Each writes to claim the gold, certain the secret is safe with him alone. The trap snaps shut in public, and it is merciless. The claims are read aloud, and every honest leader has submitted the same lie. The town that prided itself on truth is exposed as a town of frauds. The gold was never real, the remark was an invention, and the test was the point. The stranger took nothing from Hadleyburg but its single-treasured illusion. He proved the famous honesty was never honesty, only an honesty never tried. Here is the philosophical claim Twain is pressing on you. A virtue that has never been tempted is not yet a virtue at all. It is merely an untested habit propped up by easy circumstances. Hadleyburg was honest only because nothing had ever made honesty cost anything. Remove the safety, offer real gold in real secrecy, and the virtue evaporates. What the town called character was only the absence of opportunity. The argument runs in clear steps. First, the people believed their honesty was a deep and settled trait. Second, that honesty had never faced a strong, private, low-risk temptation. Third, when such a temptation finally came, nearly every one of them failed it. Therefore, the trait they trusted was untested, and an untested virtue is no guarantee. This is not merely a clever fable. It is a finding modern psychology keeps confirming. Researchers have shown again and again how powerfully the situation shapes conduct. In one classic study, ordinary volunteers were told to deliver electric shocks to a stranger. Under steady pressure from an authority, most of them obeyed far past the point of cruelty. Stanley Milgram, who ran it, concluded that situation can override settled character with ease. Decent people did indecent things simply because the setup arranged for it. A whole field grew from this, sometimes called situationism. Situationism holds that behavior depends more on circumstance than on fixed inner traits. The philosopher Gilbert Harman pushed the strong version of this claim. He argued that broad character traits, like honesty, may barely exist at all. What we call an honest man, on this view, is a man not yet tested hard enough. Hadleyburg is the perfect parable of that unsettling idea. But the objection here is serious, and it has real force. The fact that many people fail a temptation does not mean all do. In Milgram's own study, some refused and walked out rather than continue. If situation were everything, those who resisted could not exist, and yet they did. So character is not nothing, even if it is weaker than we like to think. The honest few are exactly the people whose virtue was real, because it held under fire. Twain seems to grant this in the end, and it matters. The town adopts a new motto after its disgrace, and the new one is wiser. The old motto had asked God to keep them from temptation entirely. The new one asks instead for the strength to meet temptation when it comes. That is the whole lesson, compressed into a change of words. Real virtue is not the absence of temptation, but the power to stand inside it. There is a sharper, more economic point hiding underneath the tale. The town was corruptible precisely because it was so certain it was not. The pride in being honest was the very thing that left it defenceless. A people who knew they could be bought would have been on guard. Hadleyburg never guarded the gate because it never believed a buyer could come. Self-righteousness, Twain suggests, is not the opposite of corruption, but its open door. This connects to the engine we found in an earlier part. Recall that every act for Twain aims at the doer's own self-approval. The townsmen lied to gain gold, yes, but also to keep their comfortable self-image. Each told himself a private story in which taking the gold was somehow deserved. The self-approval machine simply rewrote the theft as a thing he was owed. Greed and self-regard worked together, and honesty never stood a chance. We have watched virtue collapse the moment self-interest had something to gain. But Twain suspected the rot went deeper than virtue, all the way down to belief itself. The townsmen did not only act for approval, they thought for it too. Their opinions, like their honesty, were shaped by what the neighbours would reward. Twain came to think this was true of nearly every opinion any of us holds. He argued that we almost never think at all, we only conform and call it thought. Part 9. The feeling you mistake for thought. You hold opinions on politics, religion and right conduct. You feel that you arrived at them by looking honestly at the evidence. You weighed the arguments, you reasoned it through, and you reached your own conclusions. Your views feel like discoveries, the hard-won results of independent thinking. That is how almost everyone experiences the contents of their own mind. We are sure our beliefs are ours, chosen freely after fair consideration. Twain put that flattering assumption to a simple, brutal test. Look, he said, at how reliably people's beliefs match the people around them. A man raised among one faith almost always keeps that very faith. A man raised in one party almost always votes for that very party. If belief came from independent reasoning, it would scatter in all directions. Instead, it clusters tightly by region, family and class, like an inherited accent. He wrote this up in a late essay called Corn-Pone Opinions. The title comes from a remark he attributes to a young enslaved man he once heard. "Tell me where a man gets his bread," the saying went, "and I will tell you his opinions." The point is that opinions follow the source of a person's livelihood and belonging. We believe what keeps us fed, accepted, and safe among our own people. Belief, on this view, is a survival strategy wearing the mask of reason. The mechanism underneath is the same one we have met before. A person must, above all, keep his own self-approval intact. And self-approval, Twain argued, is drawn almost entirely from the approval of others. We feel right about ourselves when the people around us nod along. So we drift, mostly without noticing, toward whatever views earn that nodding. The result is conformity, dressed up in each person's mind as conviction. His sharpest line cuts to the bone of the matter. We all do a great deal of feeling, he wrote, and mistake it for thinking. A verdict rises in us, fast and warm, from the group we belong to. Then the slow part of the mind arrives, only to defend what we already felt. The reasoning is real, but it is a lawyer hired after the fact. It serves the conclusion, it does not produce it. Notice how far this goes beyond the earlier point about conscience. Conscience was about a sense of right and wrong, installed by training. This is about every opinion you hold, on every subject, political and moral alike. It is a claim about belief itself, not just about your feelings of guilt. And it threatens the one thing you trust most, your sense that you think for yourself. This is not an old man's grumble, it is at the center of current science. Psychologists have a name for the trap, and they call it confirmation bias. We seek out facts that flatter our existing beliefs and ignore those that wound them. The reasoning machine works hardest not to find truth, but to protect what we hold. Some researchers argue that human reasoning evolved mainly to win arguments, not to find facts. On that theory, reason is a tool for persuading the group, exactly as Twain suspected. The grimmest part of the essay is about the rarity of moral courage. Twain claims that the man who stands against his crowd is almost a freak of nature. Physical courage is common enough, he says, but moral courage is vanishingly rare. Most people will face a charging beast more readily than the disapproval of their neighbours. To hold a true opinion that your whole community hates is nearly unbearable. So people fold quietly and tell themselves they were persuaded. Twain gave this idea its most chilling form in a short piece called The War Prayer. A congregation gathers to pray for their soldiers marching off to war. The minister prays aloud for victory, for the enemy to be crushed and scattered. The people pray along, glowing with patriotism and righteous certainty. Then a strange figure enters and says he comes from God to make the prayer plain. He will speak the second half of it, the part they prayed in silence, without knowing. He spells out what victory actually means, word by terrible word. He prays openly for the enemy's young men torn to bloody shreds on the field. He prays to lay waste their land, to fill their homes with grief and hunger. He prays to wring the hearts of their unoffending widows with unavailing grief. This, he says, is exactly what your cheerful prayer was secretly asking for. You cannot pray for your victory without praying for all of that suffering too. The reaction of the congregation is the whole point of the piece. They do not argue with the stranger, and they do not repent. They decide he is a lunatic, because nothing he said made any sense to them. Twain's last line reports this flatly, and it is devastating. The man was a madman, they concluded, for there was no sense in what he said. The crowd protects its comfortable belief by simply refusing to hear the truth. That refusal is the deepest illustration of the whole essay. The truth-teller is not punished or debated. He is dismissed as insane. The group does not need to defeat the uncomfortable idea, only to wave it away. And it waves it away precisely because facing it would cost too much approval. The herd guards itself and calls the man who sees clearly a fool. Now the objection, and it is a strong one we must respect. If all opinion is mere conformity, what about Twain's own opinion here? He stood against his country's patriotism, which is the very independence he says is rare. People do change their minds against their group, and some do think for themselves. The argument, taken to its limit, would erase the dissenters it secretly admires. So conformity cannot be the whole story, or no Twain could ever have written it. Twain would likely accept the correction and keep the warning. He does not claim independent thought is impossible, only that it is rare and hard. The point is not that no one escapes the herd, but that almost no one does, and those who do pay a heavy price in belonging, which is why so few try. The lesson is a discipline, not a despair. Suspect any belief that costs you nothing. If your opinion is the one your tribe rewards, you have reason to check it twice. So far, we have watched the single mind bend to the group, but Twain saw a larger force shaping whole societies from above. Not the pressure of the living crowd, but the slow power of stories. He believed that books could reach into a nation and reshape its very character. One author, he argued, had helped to bend a whole region toward war. Part 10. The Disease Named After a Novelist. We treat stories as entertainment, or at most as gentle moral teachers. A novel may move us for an evening, but we think it changes nothing real. History, we assume, is driven by hard things, money, weapons, and power. The tales people read for pleasure seem far too light to shift such forces. A book is a mirror held up to a society, not a hammer that shapes it. That is the comfortable view, and Twain thought it was dead wrong. He made a startling claim about one author and one country. The novelist Walter Scott, he argued, had done measurable harm to the American South. Scott wrote sweeping romances of knights, castles, and a glorious feudal past. These books swept the South in the decades before the Civil War. Twain said they had infected the region with a sham vision of nobility. He called the affliction, only half joking, the Sir Walter disease. He laid out the diagnosis in his memoir, Life on the Mississippi. Scott's romances, he wrote, set the world in love with dreams and phantoms. They taught Southern men to admire rank, chivalry, and grand empty titles. They dressed a brutal slave society in the borrowed silk of medieval honour. The planters came to see themselves as lords, their plantations as noble estates. A system of forced labour was reimagined as a gracious knightly order. Then Twain went further than mere influence, to a shocking conclusion. He wrote that Scott was in large measure responsible for the Civil War itself. The romantic dream of glory, he argued, helped push the South toward the fight. Men raised on tales of honour and combat were primed to choose battle over compromise. The fantasy made war seem grand, and the grandeur helped make the war. He judged Scott to have done more real and lasting harm than almost any writer. We should be honest that this specific charge is an overstatement. No serious historian thinks one novelist caused a war fought over slavery and union. The economic and political forces were vast, and Scott was a small part at most. Twain knew he was exaggerating, and he used the exaggeration to land a deeper truth. The literal claim is too strong, but the idea underneath it is profound. Stories shape what a people find admirable, and the admirable shapes what they do. That underlying idea is what philosophers would call ideology. Ideology is a shared set of images and ideals that makes a social order feel natural. It works not by argument, but by supplying the pictures people live inside. The Southern Romance let an unjust system feel honourable to the people who ran it. That is the real power of fiction, to furnish the imagination that justifies a world. Twain saw that a story can be the lie a civilization tells about itself. He sharpened the point with a contrast between two famous books. Cervantes had written Don Quixote, which mocked the old tales of knighthood. Its hero is a fool driven mad by reading too many romances of chivalry. That book, Twain said, helped laugh the medieval nonsense out of the world. Scott then came along and, by his single might, conjured the nonsense back. One author swept the illusion away, and another restored it to power. This is the deeper thesis, and it cuts in both directions. If a story can enchant a people into folly, a story can also break the spell. Fiction is not neutral decoration. It is a weapon that can be aimed either way. Twain saw his own realism as the counterweapon to the romantic disease. Where Scott offered phantoms, Twain offered the plain, unglamorous truth of how things are. His whole literary method was a deliberate cure for the sickness he had named. He turned that method against another celebrated author to show how it worked. He wrote a savage essay on the novels of James Fenimore Cooper. He listed Cooper's offences against realism with the precision of a prosecutor. His characters do impossible things, and the woods behave as no real woods do. The complaint was not merely about craft, it was about a duty to the truth. A writer who lies about small things, Twain implied, trains readers to accept large lies. From this comes his famous rule about the exact word. The difference between the right word and the almost right word, he said, is enormous. It is the difference between the lightning and the lightning bug. Sloppy language was not a minor sin to him, but a failure of honesty. Vague and inflated words let people avoid seeing things as they truly are. Clear, exact prose was a moral act, a refusal to flatter or deceive. The objection to all of this is worth stating plainly. Twain may simply have hated romanticism and reached for a villain to blame. Causation in history is tangled, and singling out one author is far too neat. Perhaps the South loved Scott because it was already feudal, not the other way around. The books may have reflected the region's values rather than creating them. On that reading, Twain mistook a symptom for the cause of the illness. There is real strength in that reply, and the truth lies somewhere between. Stories and societies shape each other in a loop, not in one direction. A culture chooses the tales that flatter it, and the tales then deepen that flattery. Scott did not invent Southern pride, but he gave it a gorgeous costume to wear. The costume made the pride harder to question and easier to die for. That two-way power of fiction is the part of Twain's claim that survives. This idea is more urgent now than in his own day. We live inside more stories than any people in history, on every screen we own. Films, advertisements and feeds supply us a constant stream of images to admire. Each one quietly teaches what counts as success, beauty and the good life. Researchers study how heavy media use shifts our sense of what is normal and right. Twain's warning that the stories we consume reshape who we become has only grown. We have seen how a romance can bend a nation toward its own destruction. Now follow that same machinery outward, past the borders of one country. The dream of glory and the costume of nobility do not stay at home. They march abroad, and there they justify the conquest of distant peoples. Twain spent his last years attacking that march with everything he had. Part 11. The person sitting in darkness. A powerful nation sends its armies into a distant, weaker land. It does not call the act conquest, and it does not call it greed. It says it has come to civilize, to uplift, to bring light to the backward. It speaks of liberty, of progress, and of a sacred duty to help. The guns and the flags arrive wrapped in the language of kindness. This is how empire has almost always described itself to itself. Twain spent his final decade tearing that description apart. He had once supported his country's expansion abroad, believing the noble talk. Then he watched the United States take the Philippines after a war with Spain. The promise had been liberation, and the result was a brutal war of conquest. American forces crushed a Filipino independence movement that had expected freedom. Twain turned hard and publicly against the whole imperial project. He wrote a furious essay called To the Person Sitting in Darkness. The title borrows the missionary phrase for the unconverted peoples of the world. The person sitting in darkness is the one the West claims it has come to enlighten. Twain adopts the phrase in order to detonate it from the inside. He imagines that person watching closely what the civilizing powers actually do, and he asks whether the goods on offer still look attractive once seen clearly. His central image is the brilliant, mocking heart of the piece. Civilization, he says, is being sold to these peoples as a wonderful package. The package is labelled with words like justice, liberty, and Christianity. But the person in darkness is now studying the contents, not just the label. He sees the package also contains massacre, theft, and the gun, and he begins to suspect, Twain writes, that there is a doubtful quality about this kind of civilization. The argument is a charge of vast and deliberate hypocrisy. The stated reasons for empire are liberty and uplift for the conquered. The actual deeds are land seized, resources taken, and resistance drowned in blood. The noble words are not the goal. They are the wrapping that hides the goal. Twain's method is to lay the words and the deeds side by side. The gap between them, once seen, cannot be unseen. He took the same scalpel to a horror unfolding in Africa. The Congo was being ruled as the private property of the King of Belgium. Under the cover of bringing civilization, his regime worked the people to death for rubber. Villages were terrorized, hands were severed as punishment, and millions died. Twain wrote a piece called King Leopold's Soliloquy to expose it. He let the king condemn himself in his own complacent voice, on the page. The technique there is worth pausing on because it is devastating. Twain does not lecture the reader about the king's crimes. He puts the reader inside the king's own mind and lets him talk. The king frets not about the dead, but about the photographs that reveal them. The camera, he complains, is the one witness he cannot bribe or deny. His self-pity, set against the mountain of corpses, is the whole indictment. Notice how this connects to the machinery of the earlier parts. Recall the prayer for victory, whose savage second half went unspoken and unheard. Empire works the same trick, on the scale of whole nations. It speaks the noble first half aloud, civilization and liberty for all. It keeps the true second half silent, the killing that the first half requires. Twain's lifelong project was to drag that silent second half into the open. He helped lead a real political movement against this, not just a literary one. He served as a vice president of the American Anti-Imperialist League. That group argued that conquering other peoples betrayed the country's own founding ideals. A republic born from a fight against empire, they said, had become an empire itself. The contradiction was the heart of their case, and Twain stated it with savage clarity. You cannot spread liberty, he saw, by taking it away from others. The objection to Twain's view is the standard defence of empire, and we should give it fully. Its defenders argued that some peoples truly were better off under Western rule. They pointed to roads built, diseases treated, and laws and schools established. Order and modern medicine, they claimed, were real gifts, whatever the cost. On this view, the civilizing mission was not pure pretense, but partly sincere and partly successful. To call it nothing but theft, they said, ignores the genuine improvements left behind. Twain's reply goes to the structure of the whole bargain. Even granting some real benefits, he would say, look at who decided and who paid. The conquered were never asked whether they wanted this trade. Roads and schools imposed by force on land seized by force are not gifts but tribute. And the benefits flowed first to the conquerors, with the locals' welfare a distant second. A gift the receiver cannot refuse, paid for with his own blood and country, is a robbery with good manners. History has largely sided with Twain on this, and the consensus is wide. The empires of his era are gone, dismantled by the peoples they ruled. The claim that conquest was charity is now defended by almost no one. Yet the deeper pattern he exposed did not die with those empires. Powerful states still wrap their interests in the language of values and rescue. The gap between the noble word and the actual deed is a permanent temptation. Twain teaches the reader to do one simple thing: open the package and read the contents. We have watched Twain attack empire as a betrayal of progress and decency. But a harder question was forming underneath his anger. The civilizers justified themselves by the gospel of progress, of moving forward. Twain began to wonder whether progress itself could be trusted. He wrote a whole novel to test it, and the test ended in slaughter. Part 12. The Knight and the Gatling Gun. We carry a deep faith that history moves forward and upward. Technology improves, knowledge grows, and the future will be better than the past. We look back on earlier ages as darker, crueler, and more ignorant than our own. Progress is the story we tell about time, a long climb out of the muck. A man from today, dropped into the past, would surely improve it. He would bring light, reason, and invention to a benighted age. Twain set out to test that faith with a single bold experiment. He wrote a novel called A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court. A practical American engineer is knocked on the head in the year of our time. He wakes in Britain in the 6th century, in the age of King Arthur. He carries all the knowledge of the 19th century in his modern head. The question of the book is simple: what will he do with it? At first, the novel reads as a triumph of progress over superstition. The Yankee finds a world of ignorance, cruelty, and grovelling before kings and priests. He despises the feudal order, where the many toil so the few may strut. He sets out to drag this dark age into modern enlightenment by force of know-how. He builds factories, schools, telephones, and the machinery of a modern state. For a long stretch, the book is a cheerful war on the past. Twain uses the Yankee to launch his fiercest attack on inherited power. The knights are shown as armoured thugs, not noble heroes. The church is shown as the great machine for keeping people meek and enslaved. Kingship is shown as a costume that turns ordinary men into worshipped idols. The whole apparatus of rank, he argues, trains people to accept their own degradation. Here, Twain the Republican is in full cry against monarchy and aristocracy. But the novel slowly darkens, and the cheerful tone curdles. The Yankees' reforms meet resistance from the church and from the people themselves. The very masses he means to free cling to their old kings and faith. His enlightenment is not welcomed as a gift, but feared as a threat. And the Yankee, frustrated, grows harder, prouder, and more willing to use force. The liberator begins to look more and more like a tyrant. The ending is one of the most shocking in American fiction. The whole of feudal England turns against the Yankee and his modern works. He retreats with a small band into a fortified cave, ringed with his technology. Then the knights of England charge him, thousands of them, in their armour. And the Yankee meets the charge with the full power of the industrial age. He has electric fences, explosives, and Gatling guns, the rapid-firing weapons of his century. What follows is not a victory, it is a massacre. The modern weapons cut down the charging knights in their thousands. The novel describes a wall of the dead, slain by the machinery of progress. Twain gives a staggering number, around 25,000 men destroyed. The dream of enlightenment ends in a heap of bodies behind an electric fence. The most advanced knowledge of the age has been turned into the most efficient slaughter. This is the dark thesis the book finally delivers. Progress is not the same thing as moral improvement, and may even oppose it. The Yankee's technology made him not wiser or kinder, but vastly more lethal. Advancement gave him better tools, and the tools served his cruelty as easily as his hopes. The same knowledge that builds the school builds the machine gun. Forward in power, Twain shows, can mean nowhere at all in goodness. There is an even bleaker reading lurking in the final pages. The Yankees' grand experiment in civilization simply collapses and vanishes. When he is gone, England returns to exactly what it was before. All his factories and schools leave no lasting mark on the old order. It suggests that progress may be fragile, shallow, and easily swept away. The deep grooves of custom and superstition reassert themselves the moment the reformer dies. The argument, stated plainly, runs against our deepest modern faith. First, progress is usually measured by growth in knowledge and power. Second, that growth supplies better means for whatever ends people already have. Third, human ends include cruelty, domination, and slaughter, not only kindness. Therefore, progress can amplify the worst in us as readily as the best. The conclusion is that technical advance carries no guarantee of moral advance at all. The objection here is powerful, and the modern world is its evidence. Surely the reply goes, real progress has reduced suffering on an enormous scale. Medicine has saved billions, slavery is widely abolished, and famine has retreated. Across the centuries, violence as a share of human life appears to have declined. Some scholars argue forcefully that the long arc has bent toward less cruelty, not more. To deny all of that, they say, is to romanticize a brutal past. Twain's reply does not deny the gains, it questions their security. The same century that cured diseases also built weapons that can end cities. The knowledge that feeds billions is the knowledge that can destroy them in an hour. Progress did not remove the cruelty in us, it only handed it sharper instruments. The decline in violence, he would warn, rests on choices that can always be reversed. The Gatling gun is still in the cave, and the next Yankee may not hesitate. Twain wrote this in 1889, and the next century read like his footnote. The most advanced nations on earth used their progress to slaughter millions in 2 world wars. The peak of human knowledge produced the machine gun, the gas chamber, and the atomic bomb. The Yankees' cave, with its wall of the technologically dead, was a prophecy. He saw, before the proof arrived, that a civilization can advance straight into the abyss. Power had outrun wisdom, and he doubted wisdom would ever catch up. We have followed Twain's darkening view across society and history. Conscience corrupted, virtue untested, belief conformed, empire disguised, and progress turned to slaughter. At every level, the human animal has come up wanting. Twain began to look past humanity altogether, toward the power said to have made it. If the creature is this flawed, he asked, what does that say about the Creator? And he put that Creator on trial, in writings he was afraid to publish. Part 13. The Creator on Trial. Look up at the night sky, and the believer feels a presence behind it. Someone designed this, ordered it, and holds it together with care. That someone is said to be all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfectly good. He is called a Father, and his love for his creatures is said to be infinite. This is the God of the tradition Twain was raised inside. A God of mercy, watching over a world he made and called good. Twain looked at the same world and could not square it with that God. He saw the suffering in it, vast, constant, and falling on the innocent. He saw children die slowly of disease, and beasts tear each other apart to live. He saw the whole of nature running on pain, hunger, and fear. A perfectly good and all-powerful Maker, he reasoned, would not build such a place. So either the Maker is not good, or not all-powerful, or not there. This is the oldest objection to belief, and it has a name. Philosophers call it the problem of evil, and its logic is simple and sharp. If God can prevent suffering and will not, he is not good. If God would prevent it but cannot, he is not all-powerful. And the suffering is plainly real, so something in the picture has to give. Twain did not invent this argument, but he pressed it with rare ferocity. He wrote his case in a book he kept hidden during his life. It is called Letters from the Earth, and it did not appear until decades after his death. In it, Satan writes letters home describing the strange beliefs of human beings. The device lets Twain examine the Christian God from the outside, as an alien curiosity. Satan reports with cold wonder what people say their loving God is like, and then he sets those claims against the world that God supposedly runs. The contradiction Satan finds is the heart of the book. Humans praise God for his mercy while living in a world built on cruelty. They thank him for health in a world he filled with 1,000 diseases. Twain has Satan note that God invented the fly and the germ and the fever. The very afflictions people beg God to spare them, God himself designed. The doctor fights the disease, Satan observes, that the Creator took such trouble to make. He saved his sharpest scorn for the doctrine of hell. A father who loves his children, the tradition says, will burn most of them forever. He creates beings he knows will sin, then punishes that sin without end. Twain found this not holy, but monstrous, the cruelty of a tyrant, not a parent. No human father, he argued, would torture his child for an hour, let alone eternity. Yet the same act, scaled to infinity, is called divine justice and love. He pressed the comparison until it became unbearable. Take the kindest man you know, Twain reasoned, the most forgiving and just. That man would never invent eternal torture for any creature, however guilty. So the ordinary good man is, by this measure, morally better than God. The creature has more mercy than the Creator, who is praised for mercy. Either our moral sense is right and God is cruel, or the word good has lost all meaning. This connects back to a thread from much earlier in the series. Recall the trained conscience, which mirrors the society that built it. Twain argued that believers had trained themselves to call God's cruelty good. They applied one standard of decency to men and the opposite standard to God. A deed that would damn a man as a fiend, in God it is worshipped. The word good, stretched to cover the Creator, had quietly broken in two. Now the objection and the tradition has worked on it for centuries. The believer answers that suffering serves purposes we are too small to see. Pain may build courage. Free will may require the possibility of harm, and a higher good may need it. This family of replies is called theodicy, the defense of God's justice in the face of evil. A finite mind, it argues, cannot judge an infinite plan from the inside. What looks like pointless cruelty may be a necessary thread in a fabric we cannot see. Twain's reply goes straight at the cost of that defence. Look, he says, at the specific suffering, not the comforting abstraction. What higher purpose is served by a child dying slowly of a brain fever? What courage is built in an infant who only screams and then is gone? The free will defence cannot touch the agony that nature inflicts without any human choice. The earthquake, the cancer, the plague, no human freedom required any of these. This is the hardest version of the problem, and it is still debated fiercely. Philosophers call it the problem of natural evil, suffering with no human author. A free will defence explains the evil that people do to one another. It says nothing about the evil that the world itself does to the helpless. Twain forces the believer back to that wall again and again. The disease was not chosen by any sinner, it was, he insists, built into the design. The believer has a final move, and we should grant its seriousness. Perhaps God's goodness is simply not the same kind of thing as human goodness. His ways and his justice may be of an order our small minds cannot grasp. To judge him by our standards may be like a dog judging the stars. This protects God from the charge, but Twain saw the price it pays. If God's good is nothing like our good, then calling him good tells us nothing at all. That is the trap Twain springs, and it has no easy exit. Either God's goodness resembles ours, and then the suffering condemns him. Or it does not resemble ours, and then the praise of his goodness is empty. You may keep the word, or you may keep the meaning, but not both. Twain could not pray to a being whose goodness he could not recognize. The trial ends not in atheism exactly, but in a verdict of withering doubt. Why then did he hide all of this for so long? He was the most beloved man in America, and he feared what the verdict would cost. His wife dreaded the writing, and his readers, he knew, would recoil. So he locked the darkest pages away, to be opened when he was safely dead. The man who taught others to defy the crowd could not fully defy his own. Even Twain, on this deepest matter, kept his most dangerous thoughts in the drawer. Facing a world this cruel, and a heaven this doubtful, a question arises. How did such a man get out of bed, year after year, and keep going? He had one weapon left against the darkness, and he wielded it like no one else. He laughed, and he made the world laugh, and underneath the laughter was grief. Part 14. The Sorrow Under the Laugh. We treat humour as the opposite of seriousness, a break from real thought. The comedian entertains, while the philosopher and the prophet do the weighty work. A joke is a small pleasure, a release, a thing we forget by morning. We rarely think of laughter as a force that could move the world. Twain spent his life as the funniest man in America, and he came to believe that humour was the most powerful weapon a human being owns. He said so directly in a line that doubles as his theory. Against the assault of laughter, he wrote, "Nothing can stand." Power, he saw, could survive almost any attack except one. It could endure protest, argument, even violence, and remain standing. But it could not survive being made ridiculous in the eyes of all. Once people laugh at a king, the spell that makes him a king is broken. This is the mechanism of his comic method. Pretension depends on being taken seriously by the people it rules. The pompous lord, the cruel church, the strutting general all need an audience that believes. Laughter withdraws that belief in a single helpless instant. It does not refute the lie, it dissolves the dignity that protected the lie. That is why every tyrant fears the joke more than the argument. His humour was therefore never decoration on top of his ideas. It was the delivery system for them, the way the hard truth got past the guard. Recall the king condemning himself in his own complacent voice. Recall the most honest town in the land exposed as a town of frauds. The comedy was the blade, and the philosophy was the edge of the blade. People laughed, and the laughter carried the indictment straight past their defences. There is a deeper theory of comedy hidden in his practice. A joke works by suddenly revealing a gap between what is said and what is true. The minister prays for victory, and the stranger reveals the slaughter inside the prayer. The town calls itself honest, and the gold reveals the greed inside the honesty. Humour, for Twain, was a machine for exposing the distance between mask and face. It made you see the second half of the prayer that you had refused to hear. But there was another source for his laughter, far darker than strategy. Twain's later life was struck by a series of devastating losses. His business failed, and he was driven into bankruptcy and shame. Then his favourite daughter, Susie, died young while he was far away. He never forgave himself for being absent at her death. Later his wife died, and then a second daughter found drowned on a Christmas Eve. The humour did not stop after these blows, but it changed. It grew colder, sharper, and threaded through with a deep and visible grief. The genial frontier joker became the bitter prophet of the damned human race. The laughter was now a thin crust over an ocean of pain. He had always used comedy as a tool, and now he used it as a shield. It was the only thing standing between him and a sorrow he could not face directly. He wrote down the connection between the two with terrible clarity. The secret source of humour, he said, is not joy, but sorrow. There is no laughter, he believed, in heaven, only in this world of suffering. Comedy grows out of pain, the way a flower grows out of dark soil. The funniest people, on this view, are often those who hurt the most. The joke is what the wound says when it can no longer cry. This gives a new meaning to his whole career. The man the nation loved for making it laugh was underneath in despair. The white suit and the easy grin were a performance over a private darkness. Recall the persona, the invented Mark Twain that Samuel Clemens had to feed. The persona kept laughing on stage while the man behind it grieved and doubted. The split self we examined long ago was, in the end, a comedian and a mourner. The objection to this romantic picture is fair and worth stating. Not all humour comes from pain, and much of Twain's is pure, sunlit delight. The boy on the raft, the frog in the jar, are full of simple joy. To trace every joke back to sorrow may be too neat, a myth we like to tell. Plenty of cheerful people are funny, and plenty of suffering people are not. Comedy may be its own thing, not merely grief in disguise. There is real truth in that, and the picture should be balanced. Twain's humour was not only a mask, it was also a genuine love of life's absurdity. The two sources, joy and sorrow, ran side by side in him throughout. Early on, delight was uppermost, and the laughter was light and warm. Late in life, grief gained the upper hand, and the laughter turned to ash. The same gift served first as celebration, and at last as survival. This idea has found support in modern study of comedy and the mind. Researchers have noted how often professional comedians report histories of depression and loss. Some studies find that comic performers score unusually high on certain measures of melancholy. Humour appears to function for many as a way to manage pain and gain control over it. Making others laugh can convert private suffering into something shared and bearable. Twain seems to have lived that mechanism decades before anyone measured it. So the laughter was real, and the sorrow underneath it was real too. But the sorrow kept deepening past anything humour could finally hold. The losses piled up, the doubts hardened, and the comfort drained away. Twain pushed his thinking to its furthest and bleakest edge. If the world is this cruel, and God this doubtful, and the self this divided, he asked one last thing. What if none of it, not the world, not the self, not the suffering, is real at all? Part 15. Nothing exists. When all comfort fails, the mind looks for one last place to stand. If the world is full of pointless agony, perhaps the agony is not what it seems. Perhaps the whole terrible scene is a kind of mistake, a thing that can be dissolved. This is the final move available to a mind in unbearable pain. Not to fix the world and not to flee it, but to deny that it is there. Twain, at the very end, reached for exactly that escape. He worked for years on a story he never finished, in several versions. It is usually called The Mysterious Stranger, and it was published after his death. A strange and beautiful youth appears in a small medieval village. He has uncanny powers, and he says his name is Satan, after his fallen uncle. But he is not the devil of cruelty, he is something stranger and colder. He looks on human beings with a pity that shades into contempt. This Satan delivers Twain's harshest verdict on the human creature. He marvels at the moral sense, the very thing humans are proudest of. It is the faculty, he says, that lets them do wrong, and they alone possess it. He watches them torture and kill one another over beliefs, and call it righteousness. Here is the argument from far earlier in our series, given its final voice. The creature with the moral sense is the only creature that is truly low. But the story builds towards something deeper than misanthropy. Throughout, the boy who narrates it has clung to his sense of a solid world. However cruel life is, it has at least seemed real, and God has seemed to be there. At the very end, Satan takes that last certainty away too. He turns to the boy and reveals the secret behind the whole of existence. And the revelation is the bleakest line Twain ever wrote. Nothing exists, Satan says, and it is all a dream. There is no God, no universe, no human race, no earthly life, no heaven, no hell. It is all a vision, a foolish and grotesque dream, and nothing more. Even Satan himself, he admits, is only a part of that dream. The boy is alone, the one true thing in an empty nothing. And even he is not a person, but only a wandering, homeless thought. This is a real philosophical position, and it has a name. It is a form of solipsism, the view that only one's own mind can be known to exist. Everything else, the world, other people, even one's own body, may be only ideas. The mind cannot get outside itself to check whether anything answers to its experience. Perhaps, the solipsist says, there is nothing out there at all. Perhaps the entire show is staged inside a single dreaming consciousness. Watch how this completes the long road we have travelled. Recall the dream self, which Twain thought might be more real than the waking one. Here, that suspicion reaches its limit. The dream is all there is. The waking world, the artificial self, the whole solid scene, dissolves into a thought. The divided self had two halves, and now even the realer half is found to be empty. The self that dreams is not a person, but a thought adrift in nothing. There is a strange and bitter comfort in this final move. If nothing exists, then the suffering does not exist either. The dead daughters, the burning hell, the cruelty of nature, all unreal. The grief that humour could no longer hold is, on this view, a dream's grief. Satan calls the dream foolish and grotesque, but he also calls the boy free. Free to dream better dreams, now that he knows none of it is true. The objection to solipsism is famous, and, in a way, unanswerable both ways. It cannot be disproved, because any evidence you offer is part of the very dream in doubt. But for the same reason, it cannot be lived, and almost no one truly holds it. The solipsist still flinches from the falling rock, and grieves the lost child. The philosopher who denies the world steps around the furniture like everyone else. A theory you cannot live, the critic says, is a confession, not a conclusion. And there is reason to read this ending exactly that way. Twain wrote it after losing his daughters, his wife, and his faith. The denial of reality is what a mind reaches for when reality has become too much. Nothing exists may be lesser proof than the last cry of unbearable grief. It is the wish of a man who could not save what he loved. If the loss is only a dream, then perhaps the love was not truly lost. We should also be honest about the manuscript itself. Twain never finished it, and he wrote the story in several conflicting versions. The famous "Nothing Exists" ending was attached by an editor after his death. For decades, readers took it as Twain's final settled word, and scholars later questioned that. The version most people know may be partly the work of another hand. So we should hold this conclusion as his darkest reach, not his calm last testament. Still, the reach itself is real, and it tells us where the road led. Twain followed his own logic to the place where the world goes dark. He had stripped away free will, unselfishness, conscience, virtue, progress, and God. At the end, he stripped away existence itself, leaving a single lonely thought. It is the furthest point a despairing mind can travel and still speak. Beyond nothing exists. There is only silence. We have now followed Mark Twain all the way down, from the loss of free will to the loss of the world entire. The question that remains is whether this dark journey was a descent into truth or into illness. A century has passed since he died, and we are now able to judge. We can ask of each conclusion what has survived and what has not. Part 16. The verdict 1 century later. We have reconstructed a philosophy, not a collection of jokes. It began with a man we thought we knew, and it ended in the dark. Free will gone, unselfishness denied, conscience exposed as trained, the moral sense called a curse, virtue called untested, progress called slaughter. God put on trial, and existence itself dissolved into a dream. The task now is to judge this body of thought as a whole. Begin with the foundation, the denial of free will. Here Twain has, if anything, gained ground in the century since his death. The picture of the human being as a cause machine is now mainstream in science. Neuroscience traces our choices to processes we neither see nor author. The hard determinist position he held is defended today by serious thinkers. On this, the genial humorist was ahead of his age, not behind it. His claim about unselfishness fared less well, and we saw why. The strict argument that every act is selfish was refuted by Butler and by the laboratory. Real other-directed motivation appears to exist, measured in careful experiments, but the spirit of his point survives the failure of its letter. We do overrate our own nobility, and we do hide our motives from ourselves. As a proof he failed, and as a warning against self-flattery he endures. His insight into the trained conscience has aged into established science. Moral psychology now agrees that our intuitions are largely shaped by culture. We feel our verdicts first and reason toward them after, just as he said. The slaveholder's calm conscience is the permanent warning of his work. Somewhere our own righteous certainties are being recorded for a later age to judge. On the made nature of conscience, Twain was simply right. His claim that race is a fiction was perhaps his most prophetic. A century before the genome was mapped, he saw the category was a costume. Modern biology has largely confirmed that race is not a clean, natural kind. The switched cradle of his novel anticipated a finding the science only later reached. Here, a writer of fiction outran the experts by 100 years. Of all his ideas, this one reads least like the past and most like the present. On virtue and the power of situation, the laboratory has vindicated him. The most honest town in the land, exposed by a sack of gold, was a true parable. Ordinary people, placed in the wrong situation, will do extraordinary harm. Character is real, but weaker than we believe, exactly as Hadleyburg taught. And self-righteousness, he showed, is not safety from corruption, but the door to it. The town that could not imagine being bought was the easiest of all to buy. On progress, history wrote his footnote in blood. He warned that advancement multiplies our power without improving our nature. The century after his death used its genius to kill on a scale never seen. The Yankees' cave, walled with the technologically dead, was a prophecy fulfilled. Yet the counter-argument stands beside him, and it is strong. Suffering has also fallen in medicine and law by the same advancing hand. The honest verdict is that he saw a real danger, but not the whole picture. Progress is neither salvation nor doom, but a sharper tool in unchanged hands. On empire, the world has come around almost entirely to his side. The civilizing mission he mocked is now defended by virtually no one. The empires he attacked were dismantled by the peoples they ruled. His method, opening the package to read its true contents, remains a permanent skill. Powerful states still wrap their interests in the language of values. Twain taught us to listen for the silent second half of every noble prayer. On God he reached no proof, and he claimed none. The problem of evil he pressed so hard remains genuinely unresolved. Believers have deep replies, and the debate continues with no clear winner. What Twain achieved was not a refutation, but a refusal. He would not call cruelty good merely because it was attributed to God. He kept the meaning of the word good, even at the cost of his faith. Now we must face the hardest question about the whole journey. Was this darkening a path into truth, or the symptom of a grieving, sickening mind? The case for illness is strong, and we should not wave it away. His pessimism deepened in lockstep with bankruptcy and the deaths of those he loved. The final denial of existence reads like a wound, not a discovery. A philosophy that arrives only through catastrophe is rightly held under suspicion. But there is a powerful reply to that suspicion. Grief does not only distort the mind, it can also clear it. Comfort and good fortune let us believe flattering things about ourselves and the world. Loss strips those comforts away and can leave a colder, clearer sight. Perhaps Twain did not go mad, but simply stopped being able to pretend. The terrible truths may have been there all along, visible only once the consolations failed. The truth, as usual, lies between the two readings. His grief surely darkened some conclusions past what the evidence could bear. The denial of all existence is more confession than philosophy. But many of his harder claims were not distortions, they were insights. Determinism, the trained conscience, the fiction of race, the weakness of virtue, the danger of progress. On these, sorrow did not blind him. It removed the blindfold the comfortable wear. There is a contradiction in him we should not hide. He preached against the herd, yet hid his deepest views in fear of it. He proved virtue was untested, then lacked the courage to publish his own. He was, in this, exactly the divided creature his philosophy described. A man who saw the chains clearly, and could not always break his own. That failure does not refute the insight. It confirms how hard the insight is to live. So what, in the end, is the legacy of this hidden philosophy? Twain is not remembered as a philosopher, and in the strict sense, he was not one. He built no system, and he proved no single theorem to the satisfaction of the field. What he did was rarer and perhaps more useful to an ordinary mind. He took the comfortable beliefs we live inside and held each one to the light. He asked of free will, of goodness, of God, the one question we avoid. That question was always the same, beneath every target he chose. Is this thing you believe actually true, or is it only what you were trained to feel? He turned that question on conscience, on country, on virtue, and on heaven. And he turned it, at the last, on the existence of the world itself. Most of us never ask it once, about anything, in a whole lifetime. Twain asked it about everything, and he paid the full price for asking. He did not leave us answers, and he would distrust anyone who claimed to. He left us a method and a warning and the memory of a man who looked. The method is to test every inherited belief against the world as it is. The warning is that the testing will cost you your comforts and perhaps your peace. He looked at the human animal without flinching and reported what he saw. Whether he saw the truth or only his own grief, the looking itself was the gift. The man in the white suit made a nation laugh for 50 years, and the whole time he was staring into the dark and taking notes. That is the Mark Twain the jokes were hiding, the one worth knowing. Not the genial uncle, but the unflinching witness underneath the grin. He asked whether anything we believe is real, and he never looked away. The least we can do in return is ask the same of ourselves.